Welcome back to Your Next Episode. I'm Amy.
And I'm Louise.
We're recording this at the beginning of April 2020. We're in lockdown, and so we're joined down the line today by journalist and author Sally Howard, who hasn't reached midlife yet, but she's here to talk about her latest book, The Home Stretch, Why It's Time to Come Clean About Who Does the Dishes. I love that title. Hello, Sally.
Hello. I think I'm on the border of midlife. I think I almost qualify.
So just to give our listeners a little bit of an intro, after 40 years of feminism, women still do the majority of the housework, which won't be a surprise to most people listening to this. So while the gap in gender imbalance is slowly narrowing in the workplace, at home, it's actually widening, and what Sally's referred to as the stalled revolution. In The Home Stretch, Sally covers a wide variety of domestic arrangements and the gender presumptions that we've been disciplined into, which lead to an unequal division of what she calls the shitwork. The book combines history and research with her own story and the experiences of others too in an engaging and accessible way. Can you tell us, first of all, Sally, why you decided this book needed to be written?
I mean, there's a few reasons. I mean, there was being a mother myself, and there's something I refer to as the parent labour gap, that even people who have very egalitarian setups and divide household labour very fairly before kids arrive on the scene. When kids arrive on the scene, there's, on average, there's 3 hours extra of labour, household labour a day, most of which falls to women, 2.5 hours of which falls to women. So however much people have these ideas about being this, fair family, as I term it, we often fall off a cliff. So that was quite an interesting point. And I come from a gender studies background too, and this sort of thing was very to the second wave feminists. There was this big movement called Wages for Housework. And it was this huge rallying cry in the 70s. And I began to wonder, why? Why are we not talking about this anymore? Why is this not in feminist discourse anymore? So for those reasons.
You can relate to all of that, Louise, can you?
The book made me, think quite a bit, and the sort of reading that I did around it. And as I said before, I really struggled to think of, to narrow down questions. I could chat to you about this for hours. But would you say then the underlying premise is that there is this battle that's going on at home? My understanding was that from stats from the 90s show that male contributions to domestic chores have gone into reverse now, from the 90s. Is that correct? Have we gone backwards?
This was the amazing thing to me, that that there's been a bit of backsliding, that here and in the US, men have dropped about an hour to 2 hours of contribution on average. So say 30 to 50 something males in the late 90s put in more work. Many nations, it's just a stalling. So we have to inquire into why this is. Because I think before I started this book, I just presumed it would be this like upward arc of increasing male contribution.
Yeah.
And when I found it wasn't, I scratched my head a little bit. Some of this is being plugged by the fact that many more of us now have domestic cleaners. So that hour or 2 hours
ask you
that
about
we
that.
pay another woman to perform those chores, those are sort of contribution hours, hours of contribution that males in heterosexual unions aren't putting in. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, but actually there's also this broader social mood that reaches down to millennials who, in study after study now, are showing don't really believe that division of household labour fairly along gender lines is possible, which I found amazing. I found amazing that there's been this, this idea that actually it's not something we should try to achieve.
Do you know why they're thinking that?
Yeah, it's called, in the kind of social sciences jargon, egalitarian essentialism, they dub it, which means that yes, let's pursue achievement in the public sphere and equal representation in Parliament and close a gender pay gap, but actually at home, traditional roles, they work best. And maybe it's kind of kids who've seen, the chore wars in their own parents, and they've seen that women doing the second shift and it didn't work, and maybe they just think we should just go for the older models because they're more harmonious.
Right.
You know, it's funny because I was speaking to a few friends of mine about this. I'm going to confess now that I think maybe I'm a little bit controlling. And if my husband went anywhere near my merino wool jumpers to put them in on a 60-degree wash, I would probably scream at him.
I am the shrink of knitwear in my household, but maybe it's a feminist resistance. But yeah, there is also, we have to watch those narratives because a lot of women create these ideas about expertise. I'm just better at it. He's just incompetent, which is just actually inaccurate.
Yeah. Do you know what, Sally? I'm also an antenatal teacher, and something that I've noticed is this. I don't know if you've heard the term maternal gatekeeping when it comes to looking after children. And it starts when I'm teaching. When we do the practical baby care session where they're learning about changing nappies, all that sort of thing, I separate the men from the women, because the women there's always an element of slightly laughing at the men, not in a nasty way, but of the blokes sort of going, oh, I haven't got a clue, and the women going, oh, look at how useless they are.
I call that the crap dad, or the sort of doofus dad narrative. It's Homer Simpson, basically, isn't it? Homer Simpson looms large. And there are loads of Homer Simpsons in adverts, and that kind of guy who tries
Daddy Pig.
Daddy Pig, that's a big one. Or I think there was a famous Purcell one a few years ago when mum's away and dad puts flour in the washing machine and sort of flour is foaming out of ho, ho, ho. But, my partner, who, he was off as primary carer with our 2-year-old son for a while when I was writing this book. And the number of women who would come up to him quite boldly and say, your child is teething, his face is too red, he's too hot in that hat, unbidden.
Wow.
Yes.
It's
uninvited advice.
Exactly.
And it's deeply ingrained, isn't it, I think? And so going back to my antenatal classes, I have started having conversations now with the parents about, because I've seen it in my own friends, about if as a woman you're going to do that and you want to own that role of being the expert on looking after your child and doing everything, then you can't be whinging 2 years down the line when you can't go away for a weekend with your girlfriends because your partner can't possibly look after the child on his own.
I call it cake bakism, that we can't have our cake and bake it. No. We can't perform this sort of Nigella Lawson role, or the perfect mum, the one children just need their mums more, which is a very kind of common idea, and then exactly claim that we want to switch on an egalitarian union. And it's tricky because a lot of a big thing that we need to do really is open up parental leave so that men feel very sort of competent. But there are a lot of women who don't want to give up on the year's maternity leave, and they don't want to give over chunks of time. So we do have to look at ourselves a little bit.
Well, that is exactly, again, what I come across every single time in antenatal classes. I talk about, okay, is anybody doing the shared maternity leave, parental leave? And almost never. And the attitude is that the women don't want to give up that time. Obviously,
it's about a 2% take up of people who are eligible. It's very poor.
It's really poor, isn't it? It really is.
But then, what they found in many nations is, not to butt in, but they found that really you need a kind of use it or lose it daddy quota. That's the only way it works.
Right. So can you explain that?
So I went, for the book, we went to Sweden and met Sweden's famous latte poppers, the dads who are on sort of the extended parental leave that's funded by the state. And in Finland, when they've just brought in a feminist government as well, they've brought in what they call a daddy quota. So they found after years of experimentation that the only way that society shifts is if there's a tranche of time, whether that's 2 months to 6 months, that if the father doesn't take it as parental leave, the couple lose. And that really seems to work. And that's why, Swedes have the most egalitarian relationships, divisions of labour. But, and that's a lot of that's a lot of government intervention to get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, obviously today's episode isn't going to be a quick fix as to how to sort out the housework, childcare, all of that imbalance. But, more, like your book, a kind of intentional unpicking and discussion around it, because it is a topic that is kind of sloshing around conversation that, with my friends in our, I'm 50 now, but, in our 40s, 50s and beyond, because sometimes, at this stage, within relationships, a bit of contempt is creeping in, onto the scene. And when it's discussed in, my friendship groups, there's a kind of despair amongst women of my age because the arrangements and responsibilities that set in when the children were little have become a habit. So am I right in understanding that this is, for the most forward-thinking couples, when children come along, when the first child comes along, they slip back into stereotypes?
Often. And it's very interesting because when you look at the sort of studies of attitudes, people's social attitudes towards fathers and mothers' roles, no matter how egalitarian they are socially, people do have ideas about the fact that women should stay at home with small children, even if they're quite liberal. So I don't think we've moved beyond these ideas. And unfortunately, society really structures it. It's mummy and baby groups and all of these kind of loads of things like reinforce these roles. But, they can be addressed. Yeah. We can talk about them, we can look at them, we can acknowledge all of these things that we just do as this strange carousel.
Yeah. If someone's listening to this maybe in like a Mad Max landscape, 100 years from now in a time capsule, obviously we are on lockdown at the moment, and this might reset how everybody looks at work and approaches work and how flexible we can all be.
I think this is going to show us, it's really going to show up some cracks, especially in the expectation that it's possible to work around small children at home, because that breezy expectation from bosses that this is possible.
Yeah.
Hopefully people will now realise it's really not.
So it might change things for the better in that sense.
I think it might do. I think there's a risk that we kind of disappear a little bit into those cosy narratives of, let's bake ourselves out of, let's, bake a cake for the war effort and let's get through it. But then we have to remember that these big system shocks like the First and Second World War, they led to massive changes in gender structures. So I think we can be hopeful.
Good. I want to go back to something that you brought up earlier about cleaners. Now, 1 in 3 Britons now hire a cleaner, and I think I'm right in saying 40% of Gen Xs do, which I think you've referred to as a feminist blind spot.
Yes.
Can you explain your views on hiring cleaners? Because it really, really made me think. And you used to hire a cleaner, didn't you? But you don't anymore. So
I don't
can you explain
anymore.
why that is and your views?
Yes. It's quite interesting to me because when I did my a survey that accompanied this book, I found that very few lesbian couples hired a cleaner. And I thought it was quite interesting. Why is that? And lesbian couples tend to divide chores on the basis of the unpleasantness of the task. And it was kind of anathema to second wave feminists that you would hire a cleaner, that you would pass what they called their sort of shitwork down a class line to women who were being paid less money so you could have leisure. And I began to look into these ideas and I thought, okay, well, maybe if I pay my cleaner what I'm earning by the hour, maybe that's fair. Maybe it's then I'm not saying that my leisure is more important than this woman's leisure. Right. So I tried this for a little while. And then in the end, the clincher was the fact that it was what I was performing to my son, the fact that a woman from overseas who was being paid, has been paid to basically clean our U-bend. And what was this showing my son? What was the patterning for my son? So that was my decision. I mean, other people would say you're creating economic value in this work. There are other arguments from a feminist point of view, but I think if you're paying through an agency, bear in mind that they get half of the rate that you're paying per hour. So that's something that you really have to take on board. Yeah. And I'm very gratified to see, actually, I wrote a piece on this for The Observer, and a lot of people contact me to say that in the COVID era, they're continuing to pay their cleaners whilst their cleaners don't come. So I think that's quite a good gesture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, it's a complicated one.
It is, because it feels like an exploitation of women by other women. So
it is to fix this lack of this lack of pitching in from men.
Yeah.
And often it's, especially in the States, it's raced as well. So the hand that's pushing the squeegee is a black hand, and it is something that we have to acknowledge.
Your book is obviously concerned with the recognition and the dignity element. I mean, is the real problem here like men?
Yeah,
is that what we're saying?
I think there's the expectations, the socialisation. There's a big backlash going on that sort of celebrates housewifery and all of these things. But yeah, I mean, indubitably, men have to kind of look at their privileges a little bit around this and pitch in more.
Yeah,
I mean, because I guess if those men who have got wives who stay at home, they're able to go to those meetings and go to those networking things, and I guess their careers inevitably elevate,
blossom.
Don't they?
They do blossom. So you see this real income boost when men have children. I think there's something that perhaps there's this expectation that they're seen as more competent, and they're given more and more work, which obviously sort of strains the person who's at home looking after the children. And actually, there's a really interesting study that I didn't include in the book, but I came across saying that the work that women, the additional sort of 60% of effort that women put into the housework, men often use that time rather than for leisure to do that sort of soft networking that helps them climb the career ladder. Yeah. Which is fascinating. So that's, you're getting this kind of whole ecosystem of boosts for the men's career that women, fall back on.
Am I right in thinking there's not just the unequal division of housework, but often, these men won't recognise that is even going on?
Yeah, and the really interesting stuff that's happening is this coining of new categories of work, which I'm sure the third shift, mental load, emotional labour. So that's been a really interesting moment that people are saying it's not just about who's hoovering the carpet. It's also about who's thinking of sending the Christmas cards, or thinking of the cousin's son, or who's soothing brows or making people feel better when they're sad. So there's all of this, which I think is really a really fascinating moment to say, yes, look at all of this additional stuff that women take on that isn't about the nuts and bolts, and that's about the household management.
Yeah.
Too.
And just going back to midlifers, I just wonder if, I don't know if I'm being too harsh here, but specifically midlife men, surely now is the time for them to see, the writing on the wall as they're growing older and perhaps, a bit less desirable. Surely, surely it would be worth addressing for them before it's too late. When I was going back to, these habits that set in when children were small, worth them addressing, because otherwise they're going to be left to do all of this stuff on their own anyway, the stuff they've been dodging for years. Because
we all know there's apocryphal stories about divorcees who don't even know how to boil a carrot.
Yeah.
So we do, and we also know that women, file for divorce much more frequently than men, and often housework is cited. So
yeah. And I think women around 50, this seems to be the time when people are sort of splitting up, getting divorced, whatever, and often it will be the woman that's decided, I've had enough of this, and that all feeds into it, doesn't it? Of course it does.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge motivation, and then a reason actually why women who have been divorced in midlife are often quite resistant to cohabiting with new lovers, because they, maybe they've kind of got an exit from this drudgery and they think, actually, no, I don't want to cohabit.
No. So, I mean, blokes, read the writing on the wall. That's what I'm saying. So I just...
Yes, exactly.
I'm glad we all agree, and it's not just me being like a bitch, but,
No,
it seems like an obvious thing to me.
and actually I think it's worth the writing being seen on the wall by those people who maybe have got newborn babies. That hardwires the communication going forward, doesn't it?
It's a very important moment, and I think people can neglect it and think, oh no, it's fine because I'm breastfeeding, I'll have a year off, and of course we can support the husband's career, and of course I'll go part-time. But those patterns are then pretty entrenched because we know how busy it is for those child-rearing years.
Could it also be that the difference is more between personalities rather than gender? So one person is, a stronger alpha personality and the other person isn't. Is that part of it as well?
I mean, it could be. I mean, there are a few ways of seeing it. Arlie Hochschild, who wrote The Second Shift, talks about gender scripts, that we see what situation we're in, and then almost we wear the cloak of a version of femininity or masculinity depending on our circumstances. So we have a resistant male, so maybe we then go into kind of tough broad that gets it all done mode, and we do everything. Or we find we have a very egalitarian male. We think, okay, we can push on with our career. But sometimes these personality traits end up being a response to circumstance.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It can work the other way.
God, it's really complex, isn't it? I mean, that's what I meant earlier about sort of having a little bit of an unpicking, because this isn't a quick fix today, but I'm hoping that it's given me so much to think about, certainly.
Yeah,
so
it's really, one thing I found really fascinating is in the American context, here we have very much this pink and blue tasks, that this task is pink, this task is blue, but in the States they have this spatial idea that the man does the yard, the man does the outside and the woman does the inside, and the outside is usually just the dog and maybe like sweeping the yard, and the inside is everything else. Yeah. But it's that kind of psychological way of understanding these things that, okay, so he takes the bin out, but these are comforting narratives, but I would say no better opportunity than now when we're all cooped up and we're getting afraid to look at these patterns.
And I guess men with those outside jobs, they've usually got the the power, the power spray or the leaf blower that's like, a gun-shaped penis extension.
Leaf blowers are hilarious, aren't they? Those two-stroke ones that are just like a kind of chesty cough. Yeah, and they don't do anything. Yeah.
But it makes them feel like they've got some new toys to plug in or something. I don't know.
Exactly. But then what's interesting is these things aren't immutable between nations. So, we see laundry as very effeminate, and that's been the case for centuries, whereas that isn't the case so much in the States. Mopping is seen as being quite masculine in Spain. So these are not kind of these really shift between cultures, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you were saying before about your son seeing, we were talking about your decision to not employ a cleaner because what that displays to your son. I mean, is the way forward sort of education for boys and us getting that narrative in very early, or I don't know, modelling that sharing the load and that decency?
Definitely, and I think there was a great German study that said that this modelling is most salient for boys. It doesn't seem to have as much an effect on girls. And between the age of 9 and around 15 for boys, what they're seeing around them at that age is very much influences their kind of patterning and norms. Wow. Which I found fascinating, actually. So if you've got a boy at home between the age of 9 and 15.
Well, can I just tell you, my husband, his mother left when he was 9. And Paul is my husband, Paul, the sound engineer. So he's listening to this. But his mum left when he was 9. And so his dad brought up him and his sister. And we have never had any kind of like, I'm the mother, I'm the one that does the caring, the nurturing. It's never ever been and I think it's because he grew up, and it's funny you say between 9 and 15, because that's when he saw his father doing all of it, and they didn't need a woman. They didn't need a mother figure. I mean, they probably, of course they did. It would have been, I'm not, but it has really...
It's interesting, isn't it, how that's played out
it's
then?
It's really just...
Great.
Because
Hooray
he's the...
for Paul.
I know.
Hooray for you, Louise.
But, compared to all of my friends, without doubt, he is the one who just absolutely would never question that if there was, a child had hurt themselves or... needed tending to when they were sick, that I should do it over and above him. It's never been, and that has really stood out to me. So that's really interesting what you say about the age of 9.
Wow, he's a perfect example of that study then.
But then I've got a flip side example. A friend of ours who, so he is one of 5 boys, and I will mention no names. Hopefully he won't listen to this podcast. But his mum was very much a sort of, I guess he saw those patterns between his parents. So his dad was in the city, and it was a bit like, the tiger who came to tea type of thing. The dad comes home from work and it's like, hooray, dad's back. But now he has gone on to marry one of our friends, and they've got 3 boys, and her even trying to inch her way back into work now that the 3 boys are in school. It's very difficult. So I don't know, maybe he was... I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? Those cycles just repeat sometimes.
They do, and they feel natural to us, don't they? But that's not to say that it's inevitable that we're going to recreate what we grew up with, because oftentimes people don't. But there was a friend of mine who's a midlifer who was saying that her husband, before when they were wooing, he'd make her Jamie Oliver meals, and he was very sort of all the flourish, the bachelor flourish, and then as soon as they married, he stopped doing anything. He stopped thinking of his pants or his socks. She said, "Did I hallucinate it?"
Oh God,
this is not what it said on the tin.
Yes. Yeah, so I think maybe that's the cruelest outcome.
Yeah. So before I sort of wrap up, Sally, is there anything that you think that we haven't sort of covered that you particularly think that we should? Because you're the expert on this, so
Yeah, I think things. There is definitely a moment, the feminist 70s moment of wages for housework and all of that activism that was happening.
Yeah.
I think that's coming back. We saw for International Women's Day, we saw mums strikes in Hackney.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of women marching in Madrid with men who were brought in to look after their children in creches. So I think we can be hopeful that things are going to shift. Obviously, we're in a new era with coronavirus, but I'm quite hopeful.
Good.
So people should not despair, not cry into their soapy washing up sets.
Sally, this is such an important topic, and it is really complex, as I think we've discovered. So thank you for talking with us today. And I would urge listeners to get the book. It's the sort of book that you'll be telling your friends that they have to read. There'll be links in the show notes for the book, and do follow Sally on Twitter, and I'll put a link up for that too. So thank you so much, Sally Howard.
Thank you very much, both.
Thank you, Sally.
Keep well and keep safe.
Made by darkhorsedigital.co.uk. Shooting, live streaming and podcast production.
Hello, this is Rich Wilson, host of the podcast Insane in the Membrane, where we talk to funny and interesting people about men's mental health. People like James Acaster.
Because we won't talk about emotions because we think that's bad. We won't talk about feelings because that's bad. So they've had to rebrand it and go, it's mental health. Go, yeah,
mental.
Our brains are saying, I'm pretty clever. Okay, I'll get into my mental. Yeah, I like puzzles.
And Rob Beckett.
I've never even done a school play. I did some open mic gigs. Did the Edinburgh Fringe, somehow got on the telly, and I'm on the other side of the world in the jungle doing nights, following Ant and Dec.
People like Mark Steele.
I hated being at home, and I didn't get on with me mum. My dad was in an asylum by then. I suppose we ought to talk about that, shouldn't we? Given the premise of the podcast.
Search Insane in the Membrane from wherever you get your podcasts. Brand new episodes every Thursday.